Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling a part of the economy today that is just absolutely enormous. Trillions in transactions every year, but often totally hidden from view.
Hmm.
We're diving into how businesses actually buy from other businesses, B2B.
Yeah, it's kind of the hidden engine, isn't it? We all know about buying, your phone or your groceries,
Sure.
but the amount of raw materials, parts, equipment, software, services traded between companies, it's immense. It actually dwarfs consumer markets.
Right. In terms of dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Dollars and just sheer volume of items moving around.
Okay. And we've pulled together a whole stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got research analysis, some real world examples
Yep.
to try and get to the core of what makes this whole B2B world tick.
Right.
So our mission today, understand this unique landscape of organizational buying and marketing, figure out the complexities, who's involved, the strategies, basically how companies get the stuff they need to operate.
And it's important because, how companies source everything from, I don't know, paper clips to giant manufacturing plants,
Yeah.
that fundamentally shapes the products you eventually buy, the services you use. It all connects back.
Okay, so we'll start with the basics. How is this different from selling to, me?
Big differences.
Then we'll peek inside that corporate decision-making process. Sounds complicated.
It can be, definitely.
We'll look at how businesses market to these buyers and how these relationships get built and managed over time.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start?
Let's start with just defining it. What is organizational buying?
Okay. So the sources basically define it as the whole decision-making process
Okay.
that formal organizations use to first figure out they need to buy something, then how they identify, evaluate, and finally choose between different suppliers and options.
So it's a process, not just a single transaction.
Exactly. Definitely not an impulse buy.
Huh, right.
Right.
No corporate candy bars at the checkout?
Not usually. And the scale.
Yeah.
We're talking about businesses buying huge quantities, raw materials, components, machines, supplies, services, everything.
You mentioned the numbers were big.
Yeah, one source pointed out back in 2010, there were something like 7.4 million businesses with employees in the U.S. alone.
Wow. Millions of potential buyers.
Millions. And they're all constantly buying things to keep operating.
And it's not just factories making stuff, right?
No, not at all. The business market includes basically any organization that buys goods or services to produce other goods or services.
Okay.
So manufacturing, yes, but also transportation, communication, finance, banking, insurance, distribution, service industries. It's this massive interconnected web.
Right, okay. I get the scale. It's huge. But is marketing to a business really that different fundamentally? Don't the same basic ideas apply? Like, building loyalty.
Well, yes and no. Basic principles like loyalty, sure, they matter. But selling to businesses, it has some really profound differences that just change the whole game.
Okay, give me a big one. What's a fundamental difference?
I'd say one of the biggest enemies, maybe the biggest battle in B2B,
Yeah.
it's fighting against commoditization.
Ah, right. Where your product just seems like everyone else's. Generic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you inevitably get squeezed on price. Margins shrink, loyalty weakens.
It's a race to the bottom.
Totally. So to win, you absolutely have to convince the buyer that, hey, meaningful differences do exist here, that your unique benefits, your solution, it's genuinely worth paying more for.
How do companies do that?
Well, the Siemens Answers campaign was a great example in the sources. Siemens, huge German engineering company, very diverse.
Right.
They launched this big global campaign. It wasn't just about product specs. It was about unifying their brand and showing the impact they had on customers, on society, on the economy. They even made sure to highlight their U.S. presence during a Buy American push.
So focusing on value, not just features.
Precisely. Showing the solutions they provide on a much bigger scale. That's how you fight the commoditization trap.
Okay. Demonstrating unique value is critical. What else? What are some other core differences setting B2B apart?
The sources highlight several. First big one, fewer but much larger buyers.
Right. So you're not marketing to millions of individuals.
Not usually. A B2B company might only have, say, a few dozen customers, or maybe a few hundred, but each one can be enormous.
Like suppliers for aircraft engines or car parts?
Exactly. Your customer list might be short, but lose one of those big contracts. It's a huge blow. Or land one, and it's massive revenue.
That must mean the relationship with each customer is incredibly important.
Absolutely vital. which leads straight to the next point, close supplier-customer relationships.
Makes sense.
Because each customer is so valuable, suppliers often have to really customize what they offer. They work very closely.
Customization, okay.
The sources mentioned PPG Industries, huge buyer. They actually have a program where they ask their suppliers to find cost savings equal to at least 5% of what PPG buys from them.
Wow, they asked the supplier to cut their own price, essentially.
Well, find savings for TPG through innovation or efficiency. Yeah, it shows that intensity. And sometimes you even see businesses buying from suppliers who also buy from them. This reciprocal buying, it gets complex.
That is intense. Okay, what else changes when selling to a company?
Professional purchasing. This is key.
Meaning?
Business buying usually isn't just someone making a personal choice. It's handled by trained purchasing agents, procurement departments, people who do this for a living.
Right.
They follow strict company policies, use formal processes, things like requests for quotations, RFQs, detailed contracts.
So your marketing and sales teams need to be pretty sophisticated. Lots of technical detail.
Definitely. You need to provide the data, understand their procurement hoops. You're dealing with pros.
Okay, so you're dealing with expert buyers. Is it just one person making the call then? In purchasing?
Oh, rarely. Especially for anything significant. That brings us to multiple buying influences.
The famous buying committee.
Sort of, yeah. Decisions often involve a whole group of people from different parts of the company. You've got technical experts, maybe engineers or IT folks, the purchasing people, sometimes users, finance, even senior management weighs in.
Okay, so it's a team effort.
It requires really well-trained sales teams who can talk to all these different people, understand their different angles and priorities.
And I bet that takes time, talking to everyone.
It really does, which is the next point. Multiple sales calls. Forget quick wins.
Right.
One study mentioned it took like 4 to 4.5 calls just for an average industrial sale.
Average.
Yeah. And for major projects, complex systems, the sales cycle can stretch out over months, sometimes even years.
Years. Wow. Patience is key.
Patience and persistence, absolutely.
Okay, you mentioned derived demand earlier. That sounds really important. Can you unpack that?
It's absolutely fundamental to B2B, derived demand. It just means that the demand for business goods isn't created in a vacuum. It's ultimately derived from the demand for consumer goods.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, think about a company selling coal or natural gas, like Consol Energy and the sources.
Okay.
Their customers are utilities, maybe steel companies. But why do those companies buy coal and gas?
Because consumers need electricity or buy cars made of steel.
Exactly. The utility only needs more coal if you turn on more lights or appliances. The steel company only needs more coal if you buy more cars or washing machines.
So the B2B marketer can't really boost overall demand for their product on their own.
Not really for the total demand. They can fight like crazy for their share of the existing demand.
Right.
But that ultimate demand level, it comes from the consumer market. It puts B2B companies sort of downstream from B2C.
That's a fascinating link. What about inelastic demand?
Right. Another related concept. Inelastic demand. For many business goods, total demand isn't hugely affected by price changes, especially in the short term, or for components that are just a tiny part of the final product's cost.
Like shoelaces.
Perfect example. If the price of shoelaces doubles, Nike isn't going to suddenly stop making sneakers or drastically cut their lace orders. The lace cost is minimal compared to the whole shoe. So demand for laces is pretty inelastic to price.
Okay, so demand isn't very price sensitive, but then you also mentioned demand fluctuates a lot. That sounds like a contradiction.
Ah, good catch. It's about volatility, not
Yeah.
price sensitivity. Fluctuating demand means business demand tends to swing much more wildly than consumer demand.
More volatile. Why?
It's because of something called the acceleration effect, especially for things like new factories, big machinery,
Yeah.
capital equipment.
Okay.
A small change, say just a few % increase in consumer demand for cars,
Yeah.
might lead automakers to decide they need a whole new factory to keep up. That's a massive purchase, a huge jump in business demand, triggered by a small consumer shift.
Ah, I see. And the reverse.
The reverse, too. A small dip in car sales might make them slam the brakes on building any new factories, or even replacing old ones. So a small consumer dip causes a huge drop in demand for factory equipment.
That acceleration effect sounds like it makes planning really tough for those B2B suppliers. Huge swings.
Incredibly difficult, yeah. A couple of other quick differences the sources mentioned. Buyers have historically been geographically concentrated in certain areas, which can help selling costs, but you have to watch for shifts.
Right.
and direct purchasing is more common. Businesses often buy straight from the manufacturer, especially for complex or expensive items, cutting out middlemen.
Okay. So clearly a very different world than selling to individuals. Let's go inside the buying company now. It's not just those professional buyers, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
said the type of purchase really matters.
Absolutely. The whole process changes depending on what they're buying. The sources talk about three main buying situations.
Okay.
First, the simplest one, the straight rebuy.
Like ordering more printer paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Routine reordering of standard items, office supplies, basic chemicals you use all the time, usually from a list of already approved suppliers.
So for the supplier who's already in, it's just about keeping things smooth.
Pretty much. Maintain quality, deliver on time, keep the relationship easy. For the suppliers who are out, it's tough. They have to find some reason for the buyer to break that routine, maybe offer a significant benefit, or exploit a service failure.
Okay. Straight rebuy is simple. What's next?
The modified rebuy. Here, the buyer wants to change something about a purchase they already make.
Right.
Maybe they want different product specs, maybe they're looking for better prices or different delivery terms, or perhaps they're just exploring alternative suppliers for something they regularly buy.
Okay, like maybe switching phone systems or finding a new cleaning service.
Good examples. You're still buying a similar thing, but you're modifying the what or the who. This usually brings more people into the decision than a straight rebuy.
Which makes the current supplier nervous.
You bet. And it creates a real opportunity for those out suppliers to make their case.
And the third type, the most complex.
That's the new task. This is when a company is buying a product or service for the very first time.
Like installing a whole new software system across the company.
Right.
Or building a new factory.
Exactly. Buying a major piece of manufacturing tech they've never used before. Outsourcing a function they always did in-house.
That sounds like a huge undertaking.
It is. It involves the most information gathering, the most people from different departments get involved. It takes the longest time.
Right.
And it's the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge for marketers trying to win that business. The process often goes through distinct stages. Awareness of the need, building interest, evaluating options, maybe a trial phase, and finally, adoption.
Okay. And within all these situations, straight, rebuy, modified, new task, who are the actual people involved? You mentioned multiple influences. Is there a formal name for this group?
Yeah, the sources call the whole decision-making unit the buying center.
Which is buying center. Okay. Is that like an actual department on an org chart?
Not usually. It's more conceptual.
Yeah.
It includes everyone in the organization who plays any role in that specific purchase decision. Anyone who shares the goals and the risks associated with it.
Everyone. Even like the person who uses the machine being bought.
Often, yes. The sources break it down into about 7 key roles.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, one person can wear multiple hats.
7 roles. Okay, what are they?
You've got initiators,
Mm-hmm.
the people who first recognize or suggest the need. Could be anyone.
Okay.
Users, the people who will actually use the product or service. Their input on usability is often crucial.
Makes sense.
Influencers, these are often the technical folks. Engineers, IT specialists, they help define the specifications and provide information for evaluating the alternatives. They have a lot of sway, especially on technical features.
Right. Influencers. Who else?
Then you have the people with more formal authority. Deciders, they have the power, formal or informal, to actually choose the product requirements or select the final supplier.
So they make the call.
Or they have the main influence on it. Then approvers, people who have to authorize the proposed actions of the deciders or buyers. Think senior management signing off on a big purchase.
Okay. Deciders, approvers.
Buyers, these are usually the people with the formal authority to select the supplier and negotiate the purchase terms. Offer the purchasing agents we talked about.
Right, the procurement folks.
And finally, gatekeepers, people who control the flow of information to others in the buying center.
Like a receptionist screening calls.
Could be. Or a purchasing agent who decides which salespeople get meetings or which proposals even reach the deciders. They can control access.
Wow. Navigating that? That sounds incredibly complex for a salesperson. So many people, and they probably all want different things, right?
Exactly. That's a huge point. The buying center often includes people with very different interests and evaluation criteria.
Like?
Well, engineers might be focused purely on technical performance and specs. Production folks want something easy to use and reliable on the factory floor. Finance is looking closely at the price, the payment terms, the total cost. Purchasing wants the best overall value in contract terms. Maybe the union has concerns about safety.
So you have to appeal to all these different motivations.
You do. And this is where it gets even more interesting. It's not just about the company's official needs.
Ah, okay. What else?
The sources really emphasize that the individuals within that buying center, they're still people. They have their own personal motivations, their own psychology,
It's like what kind of motivations?
things driven by their own background, their personality. Maybe a need for personal achievement, wanting recognition, wanting to avoid risk, looking good to their boss.
So decisions aren't purely rational. There's an emotional component too.
Absolutely. Decisions are often a blend of rational factors.
Yeah.
The organization's needs, specs, price, and emotional or personal factors. The sources had a great example.
Yeah.
An industrial component maker found that some executives they were selling to had these subconscious insecurities about adopting new technology. They felt threatened by it. So the company changed their sales approach. They stopped just talking tech specs and started emphasizing how the new component would help the executive's employees perform better, making the executive look good, reducing their stress and risk, appealing to those personal, emotional needs.
So successful B2B marketing. It's not just business to business. It's almost like business to person, but within that company structure.
That's a great way to put it. B2P within B2B. You have to understand both the company's objectives and the individual motivations of the key players in the buying center.
So you target the right companies.
Right, like the Timken example. The sources, they shifted focus from the auto industry to more profitable aerospace customers based on analysis.
But then you also have to target the right people inside those companies.
Critically important. And understand what drives them. The hospital gown example showed this perfectly. The purchasing VP cared most about cost. The operating room administrator, functional requirements, making sure they had enough gowns, logistics, the surgeons, patient safety, comfort, ease of use.
Different roles, different priorities, all for one purchase.
Exactly. And sometimes you even need to look beyond your direct customer.
To their customer, the end user.
Yes. That XNSS example, they made motion sensors. By talking directly to their customer's customer, the person actually using the sensor system, they uncovered a problem, which led XSNS to help develop a whole new operating procedure and ultimately improve their own product. That deep insight came from going downstream.
Wow. And GE did something similar.
Yeah, GE's ethnographic research into the plastic fiber industry was fascinating. They didn't just survey people. They went and observed how customers actually worked with the materials.
And what did they find?
They discovered it wasn't a commodity market driven just by price, like they thought. It was more artisanal. Customers wanted collaborative partners early in their design process. That insight completely changed GE's marketing strategy for that segment.
So understanding the human element, the context, the whole ecosystem, it's crucial.
Okay, let's zoom in on the actual purchasing process. What are the typical steps a company goes through, especially for those complex new task buys?
Okay, so fundamentally, business buyers want the best benefit package for their money, the best value relative to the costs. The marketer's job is to frame their offering to really highlight that value and make the differentiation clear.
And purchasing departments themselves, they've changed, right? They're not just placing orders anymore.
Oh, massively changed. In many companies, they've moved way up the hierarchy. They're now strategic supply departments focused on global sourcing, supplier development, building long-term partnerships.
More strategic.
Definitely. Seeking the best total value, often from fewer, better suppliers. Companies like Caterpillar integrated purchasing with inventory and production planning. Rio Tinto used e-commerce with suppliers to streamline payments. Medline Industries integrated different sales channels using software to boost margins. And supplier diversity is increasingly seen as a business advantage, not just a social goal. So it's a real strategic function now. Okay, the sources mentioned 8 stages or buy phases in the typical process. Can we walk through those, assuming it's a complex buy?
Sure. This framework, sometimes called the buy grid, outlines the typical steps for a new task buy. Some steps might get compressed or skipped in simpler rebuys.
Okay, phase 1.
1. Problem recognition. Something triggers the process. Could be internal, a machine breaks, they need a new material for a new product, someone identifies an inefficiency.
Or external.
Or external, seeing an ad, visiting a trade show, hearing a pitch from a salesperson that highlights a problem or an opportunity they hadn't considered.
Okay, need identified. What's next?
2. General need description and product specification. The buyer starts defining what they need, the general characteristics, the quantity. For complex items, this is where others get involved, like engineers defining technical requirements.
Specifying the details?
Exactly. And companies often use something called product value analysis, or PVA here. Cross-functional teams look at existing specs and try to find ways to reduce costs without hurting performance. Can we redesign? Use different materials, standardize parts.
Smart. Finding savings early, then what?
3. Supplier search. Now they look for potential suppliers who can meet those needs and specs. This used to be all about trade directories, industry contacts, sales calls.
But now it's mostly online.
Increasingly, yes. Online search is huge, but it's not just Google. Businesses use all sorts of electronic marketplaces.
Like what?
Simple online catalog sites, industry-specific vertical markets, or e-hubs, think specialized sites just for chemicals or metals. Auction sites for used equipment, like Ritchie Bros. Spot markets for commodities. Private exchanges set up between specific companies. Even barter sites or buying alliances where companies pool their purchasing power.
Wow, a whole digital ecosystem for B2B buying.
It really is. E-procurement offers big benefits, lower transaction costs, faster ordering, better tracking.
Any downsides to all this online buying?
Well, some worry it could erode supplier loyalty if it just becomes a constant hunt for the absolute lowest price. Security is always a concern too. But overall, it's revolutionized this search phase.
So for marketers, being visible online during this search phase is critical.
Absolutely essential. You need good SEO, relevant content, maybe online ads, presence on the right platforms. You have to be found when they're looking. And marketing and sales need to work together here to define what a good, qualified lead looks like from these online sources.
Right. Balancing quantity and quality of leads. Okay, they found some potential suppliers.
Then comes phase 4, proposal solicitation. The buyer formally invites qualified suppliers to submit detailed proposals. Often, this includes making formal presentations to the buying center.
Okay, the pitch.
This is where the marketer really needs to shine, crafting a compelling proposal that addresses all the requirements and clearly articulates their unique value.
And then the big decision, choosing one.
Phase 5, supplier selection. Now, the buying center digs in. They evaluate the proposals, compare the suppliers. They usually have a list of important attributes.
Like price, reliability.
Exactly. Price, technical specs, service support, delivery reliability, supplier reputation, financial stability, maybe flexibility. And they often weight these attributes based on importance for this specific purchase.
Is price always number one?
Often very important, but definitely not always the only or even the most important factor, especially for complex, critical purchases where reliability or service might be paramount.
So how do marketers deal with intense price pressure?
Smart ones focus on the total cost of ownership, TCO. Look, our upfront price might be higher, but factor in lower maintenance, less downtime, longer lifespan. We're actually cheaper over the long run.
Makes sense.
They also stress the value of their service, support, or expertise. Or they use solution selling, showing how their offering doesn't just meet the spec, but actually helps the customer boost their revenue, or reduce their risks, or cut costs somewhere else in their operation.
Like that Lincoln Electric example.
Perfect illustration. Higher price for the component, but they guaranteed they'd find savings elsewhere in the customer's process to more than make up for it. Builds huge trust and shifts the focus from just price. Sometimes risk-gain sharing agreements are used too.
I've also heard companies try to use fewer suppliers now.
Yeah, that's a definite trend. Reducing the supplier base, sometimes even moving to single sourcing for certain items. The idea is to build deeper, more collaborative relationships, get better integration, maybe better pricing through volume, but it does increase dependency risk.
Right. Okay, supplier selected. What's phase 6?
Order routine specification. This is basically finalizing the order, nailing down the final technical specs, quantities, delivery times, return policies, warranties, payment terms.
The paperwork.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Leasing is common here for big-ticket items like equipment. For routine items, you see things like blanket contracts, agreeing on terms for repeat purchases over a period, or stockless purchase plans where the supplier basically manages the inventory for the customer.
Like vendor-managed inventory. VMI.
Exactly, VMI. The Plexco example showed that. The supplier takes responsibility for maintaining the customer's inventory levels. Long-term contracts are also common for critical supplies to ensure stability.
Okay, order placed. Is that it?
Almost. Phase 7 is performance review. The job isn't done once the order arrives. The buyer, periodically, formally or informally, evaluates how the supplier performed.
How do they do that?
Could be surveys of the end users. Could be a formal weighted scorecard rating the supplier on those key attributes, delivery, quality, service. Sometimes they even try to calculate the cost impact of any supplier failures.
And this feeds back into future decisions.
Absolutely. Did they meet expectations? Should we continue the relationship? modify it, or maybe look for a new supplier next time. Good performance gets rewarded, poor performance leads to consequences. Some companies even tie purchasing managers' bonuses to these supplier performance metrics.
Okay, that's a comprehensive process. So, knowing all this, who buys, how they buy, how do businesses market effectively to this B2B audience? What makes their marketing programs different?
Well, they use a mix of tools, of course. But there's definitely a growing emphasis on a few key areas. Offering integrated solutions, what's called system selling. Strategically adding high-value services, leveraging customer references and advocates, and increasingly investing heavily in branding and digital communication.
Branding. In B2B, I tend to think of branding more for, consumer stuff like Coke or Nike.
It's becoming incredibly important in B2B too.
Yeah.
Think about it. When you're selling something complex, expensive, maybe risky, to a group of people inside a company,
Yeah.
a strong, trusted corporate brand makes a huge difference. It builds credibility, signals quality, reduces perceived risk for the buyer. It helps you stand out.
Can you give examples?
Sure. ABB, the big engineering firm, rebranded around power and productivity for a better world. NetApp focused on their website and used social media, got way more leads. Emerson Electric pulled together dozens of separate business units under one strong global brand. SAS, the analytics company, consciously shifted from being seen as just a geek brand to a mainstream business partner with the power to know.
So the brand helps navigate that complex buying center, makes the supplier seem like a safer bet.
Exactly. It simplifies the search and evaluation for the buyer.
And digital marketing, you mentioned that's key now. How specifically?
Oh, digital is just fundamental now.
Right.
Across that whole buy phase journey we talked about.
How so?
Companies are using SEO so they get found during that supplier search phase. Content marketing blogs, white papers, case studies to educate buyers and build credibility, webinars to connect with technical audiences like Makino did. The sources suggested something like 93% of B2B purchases start with an online search.
93%. Wow.
Yeah. So if you're not visible online, you're practically invisible. We're also seeing B2B companies adopt techniques from B2C like clever advertising. Xerox ran ads specifically to show they do way more than just copiers, tackling a perception issue.
Okay, so strong online presence is table stakes. What about customer references? Seems obvious, but how is it used strategically?
Customer reference programs are incredibly powerful in B2B, maybe even underutilized sometimes.
Why so powerful?
Because having a real satisfied customer vouch for you, share their positive experience, that's incredibly persuasive to potential buyers trying to make a complex, high-stakes decision. It cuts through the marketing noise. It's social proof from a peer.
Adds trust.
Huge trust. And interestingly, the sources noted that asking a customer to be a reference can actually make that customer even more loyal themselves. It reinforces their own decision.
That's a neat feedback loop. Okay, what about systems buying and selling? You mentioned that earlier.
Right. Buyers, especially for complex needs, increasingly prefer to buy a total solution to their problem from a single source.
Yeah.
That's systems buying.
Like a turnkey solution.
Exactly. It started with government defense contracts. They wanted one prime contractor responsible for the whole weapons system. Now businesses want it too. Sellers have responded with system selling.
Meaning they bundle products and services together.
Yes, they take responsibility for supplying and integrating multiple parts of the solution. Cisco apparently gained market share from Avaya, partly because they offered more complete network solutions. Big tech firms like Oracle or SAP are trying to be one-stop shops for enterprise software. It can also mean things like systems contracting for basic supplies.
Like MRO, maintenance, repair, operating supplies.
Right. A single supplier might manage a customer's entire inventory of those routine items, like Shell Oil did for some clients. Takes the hassle away from the buyer.
So it's moving beyond just selling a product to selling the problem solved, including managing all the pieces.
That's a great summary. And for really big projects, it can mean going way beyond the core product. The sources mentioned a Japanese firm winning a contract to build a cement factory.
Yeah.
They didn't just build the plant, they also offered to train the local workers and even help the Indonesian government export the cement produced. That comprehensive approach, solving the broader problem, won them the deal.
That's truly selling a system.
Yeah.
And services are a bigger part of that now.
Absolutely. The role of services is growing huge, both strategically and financially. Adding high-quality services, consulting, maintenance, training, integration provides massive value and locks customers in tighter.
Like the Rolls-Royce example.
Perfect case. Their power by the hour deals for jet engines. Airlines don't buy the engine, they pay for thrust hours. Rolls-Royce handles all the maintenance. Predictability for the airline. higher, steadier margins for Rolls-Royce.
Hmm.
Adobe does it with cloud subscriptions. Support and hosting are part of the deal. Mondo, the running track company, adds installation and maintenance services. Services elevate you from just a product supplier to a solutions partner.
Okay. With all this close collaboration, fewer big buyers, complex solutions, managing the relationship after the initial sale must be absolutely critical.
It's everything in B2B. Building and nurturing strong, often long-term relationships is really the cornerstone of success. Things like tightly integrated supply chains, involving suppliers early in your own product design, that builds loyalty.
So what does a really good, deep relationship look like?
Well, many people argue for much greater vertical coordination between buyers and suppliers, moving way beyond just transactional exchanges to genuinely co-creating value, building competitive advantage together.
And that requires
Trust. Absolutely fundamental. Without trust, none of the deeper collaboration works. The sources talk about corporate credibility, having expertise, being trustworthy, even being likable.
Yeah.
And trust itself breaks down into things like competence. Can they do the job? Integrity and honesty. Will they do the right thing? And benevolence. Do they have my best interests at heart?
So it's about competence and character built over time.
Exactly. It's earned through consistent performance and reliable behavior.
Yeah.
The sources even mapped out a whole spectrum of relationships, like 8 categories.
8?
Yeah, ranging from just basic buying and selling, very transactional,
Yeah.
all the way up to highly collaborative, deeply integrated partnerships built on high levels of trust and mutual adaptation. Where you end up on that spectrum depends on things like how critical the supply is, how complex it is, how many alternatives there are.
But are there downsides to getting too close? Risks involved in these deep relationships?
Oh, definitely. There are risks and the potential for opportunism.
How so?
Well, when you make relationship-specific investments, you tailor your processes or products just for one partner, like Xerox did with some suppliers.
Yeah.
That can boost efficiency, sure, but it also makes you vulnerable. You get locked in, you might share sensitive information, there's a risk the other party could exploit that dependency, later hold you up for better terms, for instance. Suppliers also risk their intellectual property if they share too much detailed design info.
And opportunism, what does that mean here?
Basically, one partner acting in self-interest in a way that violates the spirit, if not the letter, of the agreement. Shirking their duties, cutting corners, outright cheating.
Like the examples in the sources.
Yeah, the Mattel paint issue. The supplier used lead paint when they shouldn't have. That's active opportunism.
Yeah.
Or it could be passive neglect, like the Peanut Corporation of America contamination incident, failing to meet obligations.
And that forces companies to spend time and money monitoring their partners.
Exactly. Contracts help, but they can't cover every eventuality, especially if cheating is hard to detect or if those specific investments are really high. Sometimes, if a potential partner has a sketchy reputation, a joint venture might be safer than just a contract, but a strong reputation for integrity. That's the best defense against opportunism, because that supplier has too much to lose.
Okay, that covers business to business pretty thoroughly. But what about other massive buyers? Institutions, governments? Are they just another type of business buyer?
They're huge markets, for sure, but they operate quite differently, with different motivations and processes.
Like institutional markets, schools, hospitals, prisons.
Right. Key characteristics there, often very tight budgets, and they serve captive clienteles.
Buying decisions aren't usually about profit maximization.
So what drives them? Cost is critical, obviously, because of low budgets, but they also have to meet certain minimum quality standards. Think hospital food regulations or prison nutrition requirement. So it's this balancing act. Keep costs incredibly low while still meeting those essential standards. Vendors often need specialized approaches or even separate divisions just for these markets.
Like the Aramark example.
Exactly. Supplying prisons, they worked with their suppliers to customize protein products just to shave pennies off each meal, while still meeting all the nutritional rules. Very specific, cost-focused collaboration.
Okay. And governments, they must be the biggest buyers of all, right?
Absolutely enormous. The U.S. federal government alone spends over $500 billion a year.
Wow. How do they typically buy?
Government organizations often rely heavily on competitive bidding. They issue detailed specifications, and suppliers submit sealed bids. Usually, the contract goes to the lowest bidder who meets the specs, although quality and past performance are factors too. For really complex projects, like defense systems or major infrastructure, they use negotiated contracts.
What are the challenges of selling to governments? Sounds bureaucratic.
It definitely can be. Lots of paperwork, complex regulations, sometimes long delays. Those are common complaints. In some countries, there might be preferences for domestic suppliers. And government spending can be volatile, tied to budgets, politics, the economy, which creates uncertainty for suppliers, especially big defense contractors or IT firms selling to agencies.
So what does it take to succeed?
You generally need to provide very detailed cost justifications. Demonstrating past performance, especially with other government agencies, is often crucial. They want reliability and proof. The government is trying to simplify things with online procurement portals, purchasing cards for smaller buys, central registration databases, but it's still a unique market.
And companies that do well there.
The sources mention companies like Gateway, Rockwell, Kodak. They succeeded by really adopting a marketing orientation, truly understanding the specific needs, the funding cycles, the complex decision processes within government agencies, not just treating it like another corporate sale.
Thinking about companies that really seem to get B2B marketing, were there any specific standouts highlighted in the sources as, like, examples of excellence?
Yeah, a couple were mentioned. Accenture's story was pretty impressive.
After they split from Arthur Andersen.
Exactly. They basically had to build a global brand from scratch overnight under difficult circumstances, and they did it very effectively. Campaigns like High Performance delivered, using Tiger Woods initially, then focusing more on client results and their distinctive symbol. They built significant brand awareness and value really quickly. A major B2B branding success.
That does sound like they nailed it. Who else?
GE is often held up as a B2B marketing pioneer. They've managed to consistently evolve their brand message over decades, from progress is our most important product way back when to imagination at work more recently.
And their big initiatives.
Right, things like eco-imagination, focusing on green technologies, and health imagination for healthcare solutions. These weren't just slogans. They represented deep shifts in strategy and product development, driven by understanding customer needs and societal trends. And they innovate in their offerings too, like that Power by the Hour engine contract we talked about.
So deep customer understanding, willingness to adapt, strong branding.
Yeah, and that ethnographic research they did, spending time just watching customers work, that shows a real commitment to getting beyond surface-level insights, a true marketing orientation in the B2B space.
Wow. Okay. So what started as a seemingly simple question, how do organizations buy things, really opens up this incredibly complex world. Relationships, strategies, psychology, technology. It's all in there.
It really does. We've seen that, yeah, B2B shares some roots with B2C marketing, but those unique characteristics just demand specialized approaches.
The few large buyers, the professional purchasing teams, that derived and fluctuating demand, the complex buying center with all its different players and motivations, the need for these deep, long-term relationships.
Exactly. It forces companies to think differently. How do you fight commoditization? How do you navigate that multi-stage buying process? How do you build trust but manage the risks that come with close partnerships? It's a really dynamic and absolutely vital part of the economy.
Yeah, the engine room, like you said.
And the trends seem clear. More integration, system selling, value-added services, deeper coordination between partners, leveraging data and digital tools to understand and connect with buyers. That all seems likely to accelerate.
Thinking about that mix inside the buying center, the rational company needs versus the emotional personal needs of the people involved, and how technology is changing everything. What new forms could that interplay take in the future? How might AI or more data change how those rational and emotional factors play out in B2B decisions? That's definitely something interesting to chew on as we wrap up this